Okay, so as I said, I call this a Mammoth Cave sampler. I'm going to go through a lot of material, and I'm going to touch upon a lot of the different areas, just barely touch upon them. A little bit of geology, a little bit about maps, a little bit about some of the key explorers, how Mammoth Cave grew to be so big. In other words, through connections. Talk about entrances a little bit. And if there's time, maybe a little bit about the hydrology, look at some of the springs, some of the features, formations, fossils, gates, places, artifacts. Depends on how much I can get done in a half hour. I like to go through a lot of material very quickly, and I tell people there's a story behind every single one of these pictures, which we could go on, but for me, it's more important to share some of the material than to go into all of the details. Here we see a picture of one of the founding Green River Grotto members. This is Leanne, who caved with me some years ago down at Mammoth. She's up in a passage called Minna's Way. So I'm going to see if I can advance here. This is not advancing. Okay. Okay, so welcome to Mammoth Cave. As you can see, the park does preserve historically significant cave passages with paved brick. This is an effort, this is the entrance to Mammoth Cave, known as Houchkin's Narrows. This is what greets all visitors into the cave for the most part. Mammoth Cave, talk about the geology of Mammoth Cave area a little bit, and that kind of leads into the question is, why is Mammoth Cave so large? How did it get to be so big, and what makes it so special? And if we look at the strategic column of Mammoth Cave, and this is Kentucky, strategic column. It's kind of topped off by some Pennsylvania age Caseyville conglomerate. But the Mammoth Cave Plateau itself, if we look over here on the chart, Mammoth Cave, and I'm using my cursor, I hope you can see that, is really limited to just three kinds of limestone, which is the Gherkin, St. Genevieve, and the St. Louis limestone. And what's important here is that there is a layer of sandstone on top of all this limestone. And that layer of sandstone is pretty impenetrable and has protected the cave passages of Mammoth Cave. So it's one of the key factors of why Mammoth Cave is so large, because they're protected by this sandstone layer up on top. And only where that sandstone has been breached do we see degradation of the cave passages. Another important consideration is down at the bottom here. As you see these dotted lines, that represents chert. And there is a layer of chert down at the bottom of the St. Genevieve limestone, which kind of limits its downward movement. But I'm moving along here. Even as we look at any one of those, Gherkin, St. Genevieve, or the St. Louis limestone, we see there's submembers and subunits. And we're not going to get into the geology, but what is important here is that within those layers of limestone, there are many, many thin-bedded layers of limestone within Mammoth Cave, within the Gherkin, St. Genevieve, and St. Louis limestones. And what's important there is, because they are thinly bedded, there's a lot of bedding planes. And bedding planes allow anastomosis to take place, water to get in there, and cave passages to enlarge and form. And it allows for a lot of piracy, water seeping between levels of the cave. So another factor, we had sandstone on top, we had thin-bedded limestone. And if we look up on top, I talked about the Pennsylvania age conglomerate. Now, this is important too. Up on Flint Ridge, there's a place on Flint Ridge where it is exposed, and we see it right here. And some years ago, in the early years of Mammoth Cave National Park, the park actually mined this Caseyville conglomerate for its past. And there's still remnants of the old quarry up on Flint Ridge, if you know where to look. So this was, I took this picture just a year or so ago, and it's in a field of poison ivy, so it's not easy to get to. But if we look, this is a close-up of the conglomerate. And the cemented conglomerate, you can see it's cemented in the sand, and some of the fine grains of sand are exposed. Also, what's important about this particular rock is it's being used for dating purposes, dating cave passages, and I'll get into that in just a minute. a lot of that cassiville and conglomerate is washed into the cave. And it's evident in many layers of the cave passages, many of the levels. And what's important, this conglomerate contains aluminum and beryllium isotopes. And by looking at the ratio, and the ratio between those two isotopes changes the more it's exposed to sunlight, or when it gets washed into the cave, it's no longer exposed to sunlight, and it changes the ratios of the beryllium to aluminum alloys or isotopes. And that is used then to, depending upon what that ratio is, Daryl Granger out of Purdue did an extensive study of this and was able to determine the ages of many of the cave passages within Mammoth. So there's a real nice paper he's written on that. He and Art Palmer collaborated on some of that work. Down at the bottom, down in Bransford Avenue, which is down in the bottom of the strategic column, we see this chert is very evident in the passages. And this chert plays a big role also in connections, because it perched a river. And in searching for connections between passages in Mammoth, you want to always follow the water. One of the rules I was taught by my mentor many years ago, always follow the water. So this chert down in Bransford Avenue, lower levels of Bransford Avenue, is very evident, and chert is very, very resistant to dissolvement. So therefore, it's able to maintain its integrity. If we look at Mammoth Cave, and this is the limestone quarry just south of Mammoth Cave, south of the Mammoth Plateau, that we often don't get to, and it just shows and exemplifies how much limestone still resides in down the Pennyroyal Plateau. And this picture kind of paints the picture of how Mammoth Cave was formed. There's a sandstone cap rock on top, and the sinkhole plain down off to the side here. So we have all this limestone's been eroded, and the sinkhole plain is just filled with sinkholes. And we notice there's a dip in the land. It's about half degree to the northwest, and the land and bedding plains dip right down to the Green River. And as we know, water always follows the quickest path down to the base level river. Also, what's important in this picture is the fact that we have sandstone cap rock up here, and at a place called Dripping Springs Escarpment, as water comes down off the top of the cap rock, it sinks and forms shafts into the limestone. And over in this area, right on the edge of the escarpment, is James Cave, also known as Thousand Domes Cave. And there's a whole project. The bishops are very involved in the James Cave project. You might have heard of it. And it's 10 miles of domes right along the escarpment. They're not connected to Mammoth at this time. Also important is there's some residual knobs, and this is further out in the sinkhole plain, and these knobs also contain caves. I think it's called Onyx Cave is out in the knobs. So how did Mammoth Cave get to be so big? Cap rock, thinly bedded limestone, and the sinkhole plain feeding this water down a slightly dipping landscape into the Green River. So here's a picture of it. The Pennyroyal Plateau, or the sinkhole plain, is just filled with sinkholes. We go uphill to the Dripping Springs Escarpment, and it's named that after the Dripping Springs Church, which is down in this area. And up to the Mammoth Cave Plateau, sometimes known as the Chester Upland or the Chester Plateau. The Pennyroyal Plateau is also known sometimes as the Barrens. Ancient Indians used to keep this devoid of any trees. They used to burn this and occasionally to keep it in grasslands, because they knew game, buffalo and whatnot, loved the grasslands. So this would become a prime hunting grounds historically. Also, this is a digital elevation model, and I just show this. The Mammoth Cave ridges, Toohey Ridge, Lee Ridge, Fisher Ridge, all those ridges are right here. Turnhole Bend is right in this area, but this is a sinkhole plain. It's just filled with thousands and thousands of sinkholes, and all this water is flowing towards the ridges constantly. So we have a lot of underground. And if you look over here, this is the drainage into Turnhole Bend. It's a massive drain. Here's a picture of the sinkhole plain. This is looking towards Mammoth Cave, up the Dripping Springs escarpment here. And you can see this is just filled with sinkholes. And some of these are plugged sinkholes. They're holding water, but most of them are not. So there are no streams whatsoever on the sinkhole plain. And here's, this is looking from the Chester escarpment. Mammoth used to be the Mammoth hunting lodge up there now, but this is looking from the Chester escarpment, and this is one of the knobs that I talked about. It's a residual knob out towards south of Mammoth Cave. So what happened, how this cave formed, actually, we have the sandstone cap rock, we have water coming in from the sinkhole plain, and water always sinks to the lowest level of the base river around it. And as the Green River, because of glaciation over the years, the Green River in size went deeper. And when the Green River went deeper, water was pirated to lower levels of the cave, forming new passages. And that process was repeated again as there was more glaciation. And in between, there was aggradation, passages backed up and filled with sand and mud, and that's evident throughout the cave also. And finally, the Green River today is at its, not at its base level, but there's about 40 to 50 feet of aggradation or glacial fill in the bottom of the Green River. So it's not its natural state. Turnhole Bend is actually underneath the water. The passage underneath the water feeds a lot of water there and upwells at Turnhole Bend. So consequently, because of all this, we have a, I don't know, get rid of this here or not. Because of all that various levels, Mammoth Cave is comprised of 5 major levels of caves. Some call it 6. The oldest levels were a long-term. They formed immensely large passages, and the oldest passage in Mammoth Cave is over in Floyd Collins Crystal Cave, Collins Avenue. And if you're fortunate, and right now it's a giant canyon, I don't know, 100 feet high or so, but if you traverse it all the way up to the end where it began, you'll find about a 3 foot wide phoratic tube where Collins Avenue started. So it's almost the highest, oldest passage in the cave. Kentucky Avenue is also in that, and over in Long's Cave, it's as ancient as well. So down at the bottom, here's Echo River down at the bottom. This is almost at base level of the Green River. And that comes into play when we look at connections, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Let's look at maps here for just a minute. The earliest eyedrop map of Mammoth Cave is probably, I don't know what, I'm trying to think. This is the earliest known map of Mammoth Cave. So compared to what it was today, it's just a drop in the bucket. This is called an eyedrop map. So somebody drew this from memory. 1897, I think. Or, I'm sorry, 1809. Now this is one step better. A guy named Lee came along and produced this map of Mammoth. And what's interesting, it's not only a plan view, but it's a profile view of the passages as well. So this was something brand new, but it still falls short of what we know today. 1897, Call came along, and his map a little bit more. And you notice there's no north-south arrows. There's no, this kind of a fantasy map more than anything else. It is traversable, though, if you know the passages. And of course, today the Mammoth Cave System 2020 is comprised of a Mammoth Cave system, and it's much more than the original cave. The original cave is down in this area. Raffle Cave, Proctor Cave, all added on later. So the map looks completely different than it did today. And in fact, the detail that's involved, here's a CRF map of the main cave. And it shows the complexity because it's showing you all 5 levels superimposed on top of each other. So it's pretty hard to navigate with as is, but it's a very detailed map. So that's a state of mapping of Mammoth Cave today. So Mammoth Cave right now is 412. I don't know today. A month or so ago, Mammoth Cave was 412 miles long, by the way. And this is completely traversable passage. And besides the 412 miles of cave, there are 400 and some additional caves within the Mammoth Cave National Park. And most of these are not connected at all to the cave. These are independent. Some are on the north side of the river, some are on the south side of the river. Most are on the south side of the river. No cave passages cross underneath the Green River, at least not yet. So who were some of the explorers of Mammoth Cave? And I'll just run through this real briefly. Obviously the Indians, we know 2,000 years ago, were in the cave and they were mining minerals. And this is an artist's rendition of what that might have looked like. And what's pretty amazing is their remnants of their mining operation and their presence is felt deep in the cave. They traveled 10, 12 miles into the cave at times. It's just absolutely amazing. And they had cloth moccasins, or I'm sorry, not cloth, but moccasins made out of reeds, and they were burning cane reed torches. It's hard to imagine how they got to some of the places they did. So some of the early explorers, of course, they didn't write anything down, directions. Long King Stephen Bishop, who was a pretty famous guy, slave, later freed, but Stephen was a real cave explorer and probably explored another 10 or 15 miles of cave. He was kind of fearless. A little later on, Ed Bishop came along, who was a nephew of Stephen Bishop, and Ed Bishop was another very curious fellow. He was a well sought after guide at Mammoth Cave. And he had the good fortune of running into the next guy that we're talking about here. This is Max Kemper. Max Kemper was a German who came to visit Mammoth Cave for just a few weeks and ended up staying almost a year. He was hired to do an instrument survey of Mammoth Cave. And they did about 35 miles of cave passage. And to this day, the Kemper map, which is right here, is still one of the mainstay maps of Mammoth Cave. And this was done in 1908. This shows Mammoth Cave proper. And this was done with uncanny accuracy. If you laid today's survey on top of Mammoth Cave, only in a few places will you find deviations of a foot or two. And they did this all by oil lamp. And in addition, their levels are shown. This is a close-up of part of the Kemper map. The cave levels are shown in various colors in the actual Kemper map. And we talked about, we compare that to the CRF map that I just showed you superimposed. So this one's a little bit easier to follow. It doesn't have quite the complexity of the CRF map. Next guy that came along was very important, Floyd Collins, and I'm not going to go into that. He has a whole story by himself. Obviously, trapped in Sand Cave, trying to find more cave to explore. He was trying to find cave closer to the main road. His cave, Floyd Collins Crystal Cave, was just too far from the main route. And it was over stagecoach, it was rut road, it was hard to get to. So he was trying to find something closer when he was searching for Sand Cave, when that rock fell on a leg on the back of his ankle and trapped him and killed him. Next guy who came along probably, and there are just many, 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 many people who were involved, but I say Roger Brucker was probably the next guy. He was pretty instrumental in getting Cave Research Foundation started, and he's been one of my mentors. So let's see, what time is it here? We still have time, Christian?
Oh, don't even worry about the time, Rich. This is such a good presentation. I don't think anyone's gonna fall asleep.
Okay. All right. Well, connections. So how did Mammoth Cave get to be so large? Uh, uh, Obviously, you know, from the first map we saw of the early 1800s, Mammoth Cave, the passages were always there. And I'm always amazed every time I'm in there. I say, well, how did they only know of 12 miles of passage? You just, in Mammoth Cave, every passage goes someplace, almost always. It just, you know, every passage goes someplace. Behind every rock, there's a passage, it goes someplace. And how could they say it was only 10 miles long or 35 miles long? Because every passage goes someplace. So it's just a matter of whether it was ever, whether you ever went there and mapped it or not. So and you'll find out that I love maps, but I do not like to map. So I do my own kind of mapping. Excuse me. So connections help Mammoth Cave grow leaps and bounds. The problem with connections is that once a cave is connected to Mammoth, it loses its individual identity and now becomes part of the Mammoth Cave system. So if you talk to guys like Jim Borden, that had negative effects for all his efforts in the past. But anyways, connections. So I said there were, you know, like 400 caves in Mammoth Cave, and each of these caves, you know, so how many caves are connected into Mammoth Cave right at this point in time? And this list changes all the time, but we could look at each one of these caves, and I'll type number 3, Donkey Cave. If you ever go in the Donkey Cave and want to get into Mammoth, you've got to be thinner than Christian, I think, to get in. There's a constriction that they had to pull a person through, push on one side and pull on the other side to make the connection. So there's stories behind all this, but all these caves have been connected ultimately into the Mammoth Cave system, and there's a story behind each one of these connections. And as I said, there's no map of the connections, so Rich did I did my own map on some of these connections so I can navigate all these connections. You'll see there's no scale, there's no north-south, and it doesn't meet any of your survey standards. I know Josh is cringing in his chair right at this point, but
I love it.
But some of the real history, one of the first connections came from the Flint Ridge side, and this is by the CAF. They were on an 8-10 hour trip, and they got really far back into the cave, and they came across the signature in the Waterfield Passage. And it happened to be Pete Hansen, PH, with an arrow pointing in it. And they were absolutely puzzled. They had been searching for a connection to Mammoth just for years, and they spent countless hours doing this. And they got to this point in a passage, and they saw these arrows, and they said, Pete Hansen must have been here from, you know, the river. We must be getting close. But they rescinded. They went back because they were so far away from, and they were going to be overdue. So they went back without exploring and came back later and followed this passage. And what's interesting is the passage actually came out in Cascade Hall. And Cascade Hall, this is a picture of Cascade Hall with Echo River.
That's Minnehaha. I'd like to point out that I go there every single week. Every single week. Okay.
And do what?
That area looks a little different now. There's now some like hydro geo equipment there. There's some stilling wells and whatnot. We go and take isotope samples to measure the. We're trying to look at the flows in the river because of Echo and River Styx will actually reverse back into the cave and from one spring to the other. There's weird stuff, but it's just I had to say that because it's so funny. I didn't know that this is where that happened because I go there all the time.
Well, let me go on and you'll see this. So anyways, the river was pretty high at this point. You see the Taurus rails there were impassable, and there happens to be a lot of eyeless fish and crayfish right in this area too. So if you ever get down there. But anyway, the water was kind of high, and in fact, this is higher than normal, but back some years ago, they built a dam down at Brownsville on the Green River. And the whole idea of that was make the Green River higher so boats could float up from Brownsville to Mammoth Cave and visit Mammoth Cave. But anyways, subsequently dam has been breached and the dam is now removed, and the water level in Mammoth Cave has been lowered because Echo River here flows directly into Mammoth Cave, and when the Green River lowers, Echo River lowers as well. So anyways, the connection passage was always covered in water, and they never found it. It was on one of Bishop's early maps, but no one ever paid much attention to it. But anyways, when the water level lowers, you'll see over here off to the side, there's a passage, water-filled passage. And this is Hanson's Lost River. This is where that Pete Hansen signature came from. So Pete Hansen and company went up this river once, put those initials on the mud bank, and never explored much further up it, as far as we know. So some years ago, there was an effort made to here's some cavers in that passage. And these are photos by Jack Wheat, Ranger Jack Wheat down there. So these are Jack's pictures that I'm stealing. So here's a couple of the guys you may recognize. Some of you may recognize these two. They are park employees who are doing that trip, Hanson Lost River. So there's a whole story behind that connection, but we won't go into that. Another connection, this is one from Colossal Cave. This is the Colossal Cave entrance all the way up to Unknown Cave, and you're passing a connection with Salts along the way. But I'll take you on this a little bit. So this is the Colossal Cave entrance. And still, if you look at some of the historic pictures, this iron pipe railing is very prominent in the early pictures. And I didn't show those. I mean, as I said, there's long stories behind each of these, hundreds of pictures. But on the way down, here's Roy Hunt to the river. And I'll just take you along this connection route a little bit, show you what it's like. And it just keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller. But the key here is get to the river, get to the water. And what happens in Mammoth, and I'll just tell you that real quick, is what happens in Mammoth is to get to other areas, to get to other levels, sometimes you got to go down a pit, and every single pit has a drain of some kind or multiple drains. And you want to get down to the water, and the water will take you to other passages, perhaps another pit where you can ascend and get into further levels. So some of traversing Mammoth Cave is going up and down between different levels following the water. So you notice the R up here, it's to the river. And this is Colossal River. And it's really not a big river, as you can see. Here's Roger Brucker, Andy Armstrong, who some of you may know is right behind him. And this is the Colossal River. And there again, there's crayfish, blind eyeless crayfish in this river. And the river's only, I don't know, 6-7 inches deep. It's kind of I have some pictures of that, but didn't show them. So along that route then too, you have a missing passage. Here part of the passage past Lurberger Avenue, where the floor of the passage is missing. It drops down there. There's water below because we're following the water there again. The river is down below. This was a meandering canyon. The river was down below. We're following the water. Key words here. And we're in Lurberger Avenue, and this is a big walking passage, really big. 30 feet high, 40 feet wide. All of a sudden, it just, the ceiling breaks down. It's like, there's no way on. I mean, there's got to be a way on. I just couldn't believe it. And we search and search, and there's no way on. But off to the right-hand side, there was a handshake connection that was made between the end of the Lurberger Avenue and the crawl. And here we were trying to get to the handshake connection to see if we could maybe get through the handshake connection, which would avoid about an hour and a half of crawling. And when I say crawling, I mean crawling on our side for a while in very narrow passage, slithering on our sides through narrow passage, which we did, which takes us further on to the top of another meandering canyon with water down below. And this is actually past the connection with Salts. We're right at the connection with Salts. And this is the top of the canyon. And if you happen to go into Salts, down at the bottom of the canyon, at the end of one of the avenues in Salts Cave, is where the water is flowing. and it's active water flow. And we see the initials of JL, which is Jack Lernberger, one of the early historical explorers of Mammoth Cave. So there again, secret, follow the water. So the first connection from salts to unknown was made through this passage, which is the bottom of this passage. So anyways, connections can be made. And when we get to unknown cave, we got to go through this little teeny chest-sized squeeze. And if you were on the one side, this particular entrance was bypassed for a long time. Nobody explored it because it looked pretty grim, and it probably didn't go anywhere. But in the end, this little crevice turned out to be one of the key connection points to integrating unknown cave and some of the rest of the system. So you never know. So we actually popped up right there down here on the left. I don't know if you all can see my cursor moving. This is pit dome.
We can't see your cursor, just so you know.
Okay, so we came up to the side of that, and if you go up to the top of that pit, it actually goes to the unknown cave entrance. But we took this what's called the lower Crouchway, over to Poe Avenue, and Poe Avenue is a long connection, and Poe Avenue actually this way connects with Mammoth. We saw that earlier down there at Cascade Hall, but we actually took Poe Avenue then up to the Austin entrance of unknown cave, and that looks like this. This is the unknown. This is the Austin entrance of unknown cave. Oh, by the way, the story behind that too. So anyways, the next cave is Crystal Cave, Floyd Collins Crystal Cave. And Floyd Collins Crystal Cave, I don't remember how many miles of passage it had in it. But as I said, this was one of the first connections that was made. But what's interesting up here is this trail. This is Miller Avenue. It's called Left of Trap. And this is a long, like multiple hour crawl. And this actually heads over towards and almost connects with Sides Cave. Stan Sides owns property over by Hamilton Valley and has a couple caves on his property. So the connection was almost, there was a sound connection made with Sides Cave, but not a handshake connection just recently. Another thing, is Lost Passage is on this map too. Still another story. We could do a tour down Floyd's Lost Passage, which is some pretty massive passage that Floyd was trying to get to, but the route down there is pretty convoluted. Connecting Crystal Cave, here we have a Crystal Cave Unknown connection, and I'm going to walk you through that, and that's what's highlighted in yellow here. We enter Floyd Collins Crystal Cave, and we go down some pretty big walking passage, Dyer Avenue. This is Devil's Kitchen down here, Collapse Passage, and another pretty big avenue, Thomas Avenue, over to a little hole in the ground behind a rock called Scotsman's Trap, down through some little crawlways, down Kline Trail and some other places here, to Bottomless Pit. Bottomless Pit is about 90-foot deep pit. And once you cross that, you get into a room called the Flat Room, and there's a little crevice. It's about, I don't know, 18-inch wide crevice that takes you down to Floyd's Lost Passage. This is massive passage. This is where the C3 expedition was in '54 for the NSS. It's interesting down here at the end, Bar Hall. If you go through Bar Hall, right on the end, this is actually against the valley wall. And there's some flowstone. If you crawl behind the flowstone, there's a bunch of cave crickets back there. So you know the passage goes on through the valley wall. But anyways, the route over there is kind of convoluted, as I say. We got to go Bogart's Waterfall Trail over to a place called Overlook. So that's a real nice pit, shaft dome complex. And from there we take Storm Sore, which is a wet, muddy, as you can imagine, the name Storm Sore passage. We get over to Isla's Fish Trail, which is almost at base river level with Mammoth Cave. And over here at the Golden Triangle, right on the other side of the Golden Triangle, this is all water, feeds out to a spring called Pike Springs. And we'll see a picture of it later. Non-traversable though. This area is it's about 10 feet above base level of the Green River. So it's wet, it's water, and it does flood. And it's very muddy. Takes you over to Columbian Avenue, and there again, out Austin entrance. So there again, this map, it doesn't meet your standards, but I do have a north arrow on this map and a little scale, at least, for you, Josh. You want me to continue, Christian, or not?
No, Rich, please continue. This is probably the best presentation we've had out of our, sorry, Josh, but this is, including me, this is the best one I've seen out of us so far. So please continue.
Hey, Rich, don't forget that every map has its own audience. And so those maps you make are specific to your own need. And so they're fine, man. You know, every map's got its own thing. So
Thank you. Yeah, that's what I think too. I mean, I do love maps. I collect, you got to see my map collection. I just love them. I eat them up. I love studying them and using them, but I do not like surveying. Sorry. So anyways, this is another interesting, this shows the original over here. This is the original historic Mammoth Cave area. Excuse me. And we didn't talk about all the other caves. Colossal Cave is over here. We talked about some of the connection there. Salt's Cave, Floyd Collins Crystal Cave. Over here is Great Onyx Cave. And this is an interesting passage over here. It's called the Northwest Passage. As you see, it goes into the blank space on the map. It gets pretty miserable over here, wet and miserable. But, you know, there's a lot of blank space on the map. So a lot of potential yet for things to happen at Mammoth. And new discovery, that's another, it's a whole story in itself. But anyways, what I want to talk about this area that I have marked off, this is the Logston River. And once again, I go back and say, follow the water. And over here is Roppel Cave, and down here was Proctor Cave. And neither one were connected to Mammoth. They were independent caves, but Proctor Cave and Roppel Cave and Morrison Cave over here were all connected into Mammoth via this water, this Logston River. Logston River is the longest, and Logston River starts over in Cave City area and flows and it's the longest river, continuous river, because it's perched on that lower level of chert. And we'll see a picture of it here in a minute. But all these connections were made. Roppel Cave were connected. Morrison Cave was actually connected first to Logston River. They dropped down through shafts and pits into the river. And the same thing happened over in Proctor Cave. They dropped down into this river. They didn't know it was the same river at the time because I'll show you some pictures. Going upstream, it sumped. Going downstream, it sumped. And going downstream this way, it tumbled into a impassable pit. We'll see some pictures of this in just a minute. But the point is, Logston River was the connection route for Mammoth Cave, connecting Roppel and Proctor. So if you go into like the Doyle entrance up here, yes, you can get to any point in Mammoth Cave if you know the route. And that's what I tell people, you know, it's part of the Mammoth Cave system. If you know the route, you can get to any other point in the cave. And some of those routes you may not want to go on, but you do.
Rich, could you point out real quick the boundary between like what was Flint Ridge and what was Mammoth and where the connection was? I don't know if you can just point it out on this little map, but.
Mammoth and Flint. Well, Flint Ridge is up in here. I'm sorry. Let's see. That was done. The route was actually pretty convoluted. It's from Flint Ridge up in here. It was Floyd Collins Crystal Cave and down through the Bretts River and Candlelight River, down into Hanson's Lost River. So it was down in this route.
Okay, so I see those little passages. That's basically the connection.
Yeah. And this one's interesting too. I'll just point this out while it's here. Salt's Cave out into Salt's Avenue and Roppel Cave over here. And this distance is closed. This is about a 14-hour trip out here to some very high rimstone dams. They're like 14-foot high rimstone dams out the end here. and there's an endurance limit kind of getting out to these ends, but there's still work to be done. And as you can see, there's likely going to be a connection out here as well. But so let's go on. This is looking into, this is the Logston River, and this is what the Logston River looks like. And it does go pipe full, which means it actually fills to the ceiling. And this was this particular river, Christian, was studied for many years. Started with Jim Quinlan and monitoring this river, and Joe Myman both did a tremendous amount of work. And Darlene Anthony, I don't know if you know her, she worked under Daryl Granger for her thesis, now a professor out in Pennsylvania, but she was heavily involved in the water sampling of this, along with Joe. And Chris Groves also did a lot of work here. So Logston River is what it looks like. And some of the cavers back in 70. So, and this is a formation called Amos Hawkins Formation. You notice this big flowstone dam, or big flowstone formation. And this blocked the water level typically in the Logston River was always up higher. And this happened to be at a very low water point, but it was always high, and it was sumped. This is where the river sumped. It sumped on both sides, coming from both directions, because the water level was previously up here, and they thought the passage sumped. And one day when the water levels were low, they came through here and were able to traverse. And that's what really culminated the connection between the two stretches of the river. And this is the other end of Logston River. You notice it's a perched river, as I said. It's perched on chert, and you can see the chert. Chert is very resistant to erosion, but the floor was breached here, and the entire river just dumps into this. And this is a place called Peak Strange Falls. And this is reached through the Doyle Valley entrance. So here's another picture. This is this left fork and right fork of the Logston River flowing downwards. This is a nice picture by Gary Bordeaux. Not often people ever get down this way. But as I said, there was a lot of water sampling going on, and there's actually in Doyle Valley, there's actually two of these stations that were the park drilled down into both branches, the Logston and the Hawkins River, and those rivers run together down there. But two wells were drilled down into the two rivers, and monitoring was done, I think, daily almost for quite a while on this. And there's a little hut out there, and a generator was built and whatnot. So this is the well down in Logston River. This is a very old picture, as you can tell. This was done on film, but many years ago. So the pump or the well casing got destroyed, was moved a little bit, and the pump needs replaced every once in a while down here. And there's two of these, as I said, the Hawkins and Logston Rivers, which are real close to each other. And it's reached, the river is now reached, the park drilled a manhole down into the river to make it accessible for changing pumps out in the wells. And this is down looking up toward the entrance. There's a man descending Doyle Valley entrance here. And here's a group. This was after the connection was made. This was back in '79. This is a group that made the connection from Proctor Cave to Mammoth Cave. This is right after that was done. So happy campers there. And so when you can see, like, this is Roppel Cave. When you connect, when you make a connection from Roppel, you added a lot of miles to the cave. So miles were added, like when Flint Ridge was added, when all of Flint Ridge was added, there was about 100 miles of cave that were added to the system, just by incorporating through those connections. So 100 miles here, 30 miles there, 40 miles here in each of these caves systems brings Mammoth Cave up to its 412 current miles of passage. So there's a lot of intrigue, a lot of stories to be told, and the stories are told in two books. These two books connections, and they're really exciting reads if you're all interested. One is The Longest Cave, and this is the first book, which talks about the initial connections between the and trials and tribulations of those connections by Brucker and Watson, Red Watson. And the second book is Beyond Mammoth Cave, and this is by Jim Borden and Roger Brucker, and this brings in the Rockwell and Proctor Cave connections. So good reads if you're at all interested in that. Hearing the rest of the story. So what's the potential? This is kind of what the picture looks like today. Mammoth Cave system, including Rockwell and Proctor over in this area. And right next to it is Fisher Ridge. Here we have Crump Spring, and Vinegar Ridge, and all these ridges. And let's just take a closer look, one close up here, between the Fisher Ridge system over here on the right and the Mammoth Cave system over on the left. And look at this little area between these two. This is about less than 600 feet through a sand-filled passage. Now, go back to what I said earlier, that once a system is connected into Mammoth Cave, it loses its identity and becomes part of the Mammoth Cave system. So there's no, and since Fisher Ridge Cave is outside the park boundaries, there's very little impetus on the caver's part in wanting to connect us and lose its identity. Fisher Ridge is done a lot by the Detroit Grotto, a lot of exploration by the Detroit Grotto, has its own stories of exploration. There's kind of a map of Fisher. This is an older map of Fisher Ridge. I think there's 120 miles, 130 miles of cave in Fisher Ridge right now. So if it were connected, that would add 130 miles. Down to the southwest of Mammoth Cave, and this is the whole Mammoth Cave system once again. This blue, down to the southwest is another cave system called the Wig Pistol cave system. Now this is 30 and Jackpot Cave, and there's a couple other down here. Some found by the James Cavers, some by Alan Glennon, who was a student down at WKU. Alan did quite a bit of work in exploration in the Wig Pistol system. But anyways, 35 miles of cave, not currently connected to Mammoth, but there is a water connection, a confirmed water connection. As you can see, the river running down through here. Obviously, this, to me, it looks like a continuation. So this runs under a valley, but Flint Ridge also was connected underneath the valley as well. So it's possible that we may see a connection down here into the Wig Pistol Jackpot system. So there's possibilities all around. And as I said before, there's a lot of undiscovered. There's a lot of cave passage yet. Areas that are unmapped have no cave in them, yet ridges. You got Lee Cave over here. Lee Cave is several miles long, not connected into Mammoth. It probably was at one point. Has some of the oldest artifacts of known carbon dated artifacts, going back thousands of years. Indians probably accessed it through a now collapsed entrance. Same thing holds true up at Salt's Cave. Some of the passages way far back. You have to think the Indians got in a different way because it's so far back and they couldn't have navigated that far. So lots of stories there. So anyways, James Cave, this is what the entrance to James Cave, again, these are the series of 1,000 domes caves. They're on the edge of the Mammoth Cave escarpment. And this is the main entrance. The Fisher Ridge Cave, these guys run expeditions probably once a month and every holiday on weekends. So the bishops are the people who talk to you about that. So entrances, you want me to stop? Christian?
No. Just keep on going. This is being recorded too, so this is gonna be awesome. It already is awesome. So just thanks, Rich. Please keep going.
This is good stuff, Rich. Thank you.
Entrances to Mammoth Cave. We'll talk about this one in a moment, but I'll touch upon entrances. So how many entrances are there to Mammoth Cave? Well, there's, I think officially now there's 27 is what the count is. And this is through a number of different cave systems. And here's what they look like, kind of, some of them, this is not all 27 of them, but This is how they're spread out around the area. Some of them are natural, some of them are man-made, some of them are collapsed at this point. Some of them were blasted shut. There's stories behind each of these. This is the elevator entrance. This may be a dated picture. I haven't been down there for a year. Since COVID hit, I have not been down there.
It looks exactly the same.
Okay, well, I don't know. Things can change. So this is above and oops, and below. For those of you who have never been there, this is the below of the elevator entrance. And there's revolving doors over here, and there's double doors, kind of serve as an airlock. This is Marion Avenue going to the back. Stories back there too, but entrances. So this is inside the cave. This is inside Salt Cave. This is the collapse. If you see the collapse in the back, this is the Pike Chapman entrance. This was a natural entrance at one time. Many, archaic, almost natural entrance. Indians entered back in here, and Pike Chapman. There's a story behind him. Anyways, he was killed in trying to enlarge and stabilize this passage. So Pike Chapman entrance, and this is remnants. They gave cave tours back here when it was open, and this is remnants of the cave tours. There used to be lanterns used to hang back off of this post. So here's a dated picture of frozen Niagara, and I have a second one. We're not going to go through all the entrances, just some of them, but frozen Niagara, I have some historic pictures. The wooden door that was originally on the passage, and there's no overhang, and some of the early groups. Here's some construction that was going on. The CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps, did a lot of work in enhancing frozen Niagara entrance. And if you notice here, here's the old concrete, and it compares to the newly painted concrete block over here. So this is one of the entrances to Mammoth are gated. Many, not every single, not all 400, but many of the entrances to Mammoth Cave are gated. And you have to know that in Mammoth Cave, you are not permitted to cave in any cave in Mammoth Cave without a permit. You have to be permitted to do so. To do so would be in violation of federal law, and you would be fined and ticketed in federal court. Mammoth Cave Rangers are federal police officers. They're under no jurisdiction of, no local jurisdiction. When you are fined in Mammoth, even for speeding, you receive a federal ticket, just by the way, so be careful there. So do not enter caves in Mammoth without permits. Here's an early entrance picture, early picture of an entrance to Great Onyx Cave, which is up on Flint Ridge. This is no longer, there's a different entrance now, and I didn't show the new picture, but this is the first entrance to Great Onyx Cave. And here's the historic entrance, and this picture has some significance, and it kind of shows here, you see this line across here, foggy above, clear air below. This is a picture taken on a very hot and humid day. This is called temperature inversion. This is cold cave air coming out of the cave, and this is the warm, meeting the warm, moist air up above, forming the fog. So lots of stories behind historic entrance as well. So this is another, this is from inside the Salts Cave entrance, looking out. That's Roger Brucker leaving the cave in one of our trucks. Violet City entrance, very historical entrance. Now talk about springs for just a minute here. All that water coming into the cave from the sinkhole plain, it's got to go someplace. And it's a very complex, very complex series of water flows, but there's been a lot of dye tracing. Obviously, Jim Quinlan, Joe Ray was involved some, Chris Groves and Joe Nyman were very instrumental in doing a lot of the dye tracing in Mammoth. But the point is the water, and here we see water coming in from different places. Here's a Turnhole Spring, Echo Springs, River Styx, and there are a large number of springs all along the Green River. We won't get into them, but we'll look at a couple here. This is Echo River. This is one of the main springs coming out of Mammoth Cave. You notice the slightly bluish water here. That's from all the dissolved limestone in the water. This passage has been dived back into historic Mammoth Cave, and they found remnants of old tour boats, sunken tour boats along that route. They also recently dived. There's an overflow spring just over this way. Some call it the auxiliary spring, but it's an overflow from Echo River. They recently dived that as well too, back into the same area. This is Pike Spring. This spring is pretty big, and you can canoe into it pretty easily most of the time. And this was on the other. I mentioned this is on the other side of the Golden Triangle in Crystal Cave. This is called River Styx. This is another major spring, not far from Echo Springs, and people can hike to these Echo Springs, and park just recently revamped and made handicap accessible Echo Springs. River Styx is a little different. And this does go pipe full at times too, under heavy storm conditions. This is Turnhole Bend. This is where the underground rivers well up in the Green River from below. So some of the major springs and some of the major springs among many along the Green River. Mammoth Cave is obviously a laboratory that's great for all kinds of things. And I'm just going to run through these. You guys have seen this kind of stuff before, anastomosis. This kind of rock shows very, 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 very aggressive water flow. This is down in Belfry Avenue area, Pilgrim Avenue. So also, you see that kind of stuff down in the flat room too, down at Floyd Collins Crystal Cave. A lot of borehole in Mammoth Cave, very pleasant walking conditions, as you can see here. Breakout domes, this Chief City in Mammoth Cave. Another interesting feature, some of the crossbedding. This up in Roses Pass, this is crossbedded sand. Shows the whole concept of crossbedding very well. And here's some crossbedded chert that's down in Bransford Avenue. We also have a fault, if you notice here, offset of this. This is one of the only known faults this is one of the only faults that I know of within Mammoth Cave down on Bransford Avenue here. Columns, this old granddad, this up in Turner Avenue. This interesting has gypsum on one side and several forms of calcite on the other. Rimstone Dam. This is some of the early, these guys were pretty, this is the Hunt brothers and early explorers of Mammoth Cave. And there's this giant Rimstone Dam down in a passage called New Discovery. Styrolites. So studying Mammoth infrared tube, studying Mammoth Cave, any kind of geology, karst geology, morphology is represented in Mammoth Cave and have something to show for it. Scallops, obviously, in Mammoth Cave. Ray and Curl derived this formula of showing various computations on scallops. Longer the scallop, the slower the water flow, and the depth of the scallops shows the direction of the water flow. So you can read a lot into how the passages were formed by looking at the scallops if you can find them. So Mammoth Cave has lots of pits and domes as well. Here's an unconformity over in Pole Avenue. So any kind of geology you can study in Mammoth Cave. Formations, gypsum flowers around, obviously. Here's some nice gypsum blades in one part of the cave. These tend to be up to a foot and a half long, gypsum blade extrusions. A place called Davis Hall is just very, 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 very well decorated and rarely, if ever, visited by anybody. Just full of these columns, stalactites, and stalagmites. One of the most decorated sections of Mammoth. Obviously, the frozen Niagara section, the flowstone there is pretty impressive. And down in Helictite Hall, down in Belfry Avenue, is this collection of helictites. And these helictites are formations formed based upon wind flow. Wind flow does airflow, not wind flow, airflow direction influences the formation of these based upon the crystalline structure. So some of these are like a foot long. Very impressive down in Belfry Avenue. or Pilgrim Avenue. Helictites over in Floyd Collins Crystal Cave, sight to behold, and the person is not touching them. I repeat, is not touching those formations. More flowstone down in frozen Niagara. It's a nice picture by Peter and Ann Bosted. I have a story to tell about that, but not tonight. And here's in a very remote section of the cave. We were caving back here and looked up and saw this bright light. And I said, it looks like an entrance. There's so much brightness up there. So we went up to see this, and here it's pretty white, a lot of white formations and whatnot. And I took some pictures up there, and over on the left, I saw this particular formation, and I took this close up of it. And if you look, there's it's got helictites, active helictites, I think, growing off, and there's water dripping off of this. What's also interesting is, at the time we were there, we explored back behind this area, and never reported it. And this was quite a few years ago, and just rather recently, I read about and watched a video on this new discovery that was made in Mammoth Cave, this new area. And I'm thinking, well, that's fine and good. Some of the places we've been and don't talk about are options, and it allows new discoveries by new people to be made. Even though you've been there and done that, it's new to them, so it's all fun. So here's over in some gypsum crusted walls. This is over in the new discovery section, which is not visited by many. Here's selenite needles. These little needles are about 1 foot long, and they just kind of blow in the air. They're so delicate, and a lot of soda straws, and this is, for those of you who Gerald Money, this was his last wife, Avis Money. I took Avis and Gerald into Mammoth Cave on this particular trip, and we captured her looking at these soda straws. So fossils in Mammoth Cave, there's a ton of work everywhere you look. Mennonite fossils, big collection, and lately you probably saw in the news they found shark tooth fossils, and everywhere you look there's a number of fossils within the cave, and because as you know, limestone is made out of lime, which one of the basic ingredients is the remnants of these sea animals. Now this is an interesting chart too. I don't know, none of you are probably old enough to know, but this is the Colossal Cave adventure game. And some years ago, one of the first adventure games that was made on a computer was made by Pat Cruther and company. And the base of this particular game, this happens to be a map that somebody drew of the game. It was a word-by-word adventure game, and before they had graphics. And it's based upon Colossal and Bedquilt Cave. And if you've ever been in Bedquilt, it starts with the gate inside and the cobble crawl and the debris room, and you see the Hall of Mist and the Hall of Mountain Kings. And if you can navigate through the adventure game, you can navigate through Bedquilt and Colossal Cave, actually. And Pat Cambyses can tell you about that too. So hydrology within the Mammoth Cave area, pretty complex. A number of dye traces have been made from all over the place, so they understand pretty well a lot of the water flow around the area. And in places, I'll just run through real quick. I guess I already showed this Chief Steady. This is the S-crawl on the way down to Floyd's Lost Passage. Here, this is in the flat room. This is, I talked about the crack from the flat room down to get to Floyd's Lost Passage. This is a crack. Here's a guy entering the crack, a caver entering, and he's all the way down now. And my camera case is off to the right there. I dropped my case of the camera down there before it descended. So that's what the entrance to Floyd's Lost Passage looks like. So you wonder why it was lost for 40 years after Floyd died. Here's a place you'll seldom visit. This is the back of River Hall restroom. And it's interesting, there's cave passage back here. I'm not going to talk much about it, but there's routes here, connections back in there. You have to squeeze along the side of this building to get up into the passage. But anyway, Chief City, historically, there's a lot of drawings made historically, and many of them were embellished quite a bit to draw visitors to the cave, but they're interesting to watch. Snowball dining room, due to name for these crystal snowballs on the ceiling of the dining room. And this was a few years ago. I understand they've done a lot of renovation down there. This over in Longsgate is the mummy closet. At one time, there was a mummy displayed. If you paid your extra quarter, 25 cents, you got to see the mummy on the mummy shelf back in the mummy closet here. This was years ago. Rafinesque Hall, a nice photo by Gary Bordeaux, talks about the immensity, standing on the collapsed end of the passage, just absolutely collapsed against the a valley wall. So you know the passage continued on the other side, but can you get to it? That's always the hope. Artifacts in the cave, they abound, historic, prehistoric. I'm not going to go through many of these. Ran across this carbide can in one of the passages. Signatures, boxes. Here's a note from 1877. A party went into the cave. Joe Cox, actually father of the Coxes who owned Great Onyx Cave. Gates abound, as I said. Most caves in Mammoth Cave many are gated, closed, not accessible without permits. So that's it. So I say thanks, and I'll open up to any questions.